Nostalgia can be a hell of a thing. It can cover up a lot of bad stuff in games and can make you remember them as if they were flawless. I never played the original 3 Spyro games. I was a Crash Bandicoot enjoyer and never owned a full copy of any of them. Crash and Spyro were huge back in the day, and then they kind of disappeared under a few weird or less successful games after the PS1 trilogies. But many years later they both received remasters by Toys for Bob and came to the PC, so my chance to experience the Purple Dragon's rise to fame was once again presented. I've replayed all 3 games to completion, found all the gems, freed all the dragons, charged all the egg thieves and collected all the orbs, and we'll be talking about all 3 games in this video and trying to work out if nostalgia is the only thing holding up the Reignited Trilogy. What's up chaps, I'm MagicalMike and this is one of my many reviews in this playlist series, so if you're into it, leave a like and maybe subscribe, and check out the playlist link in the description. Cheers. Let's start with Spyro 1 naturally, but first, why is this game 40 gigabytes? What the heck, it's massive. I don't think it has any right to take up that much storage space. Another erg right off the bat are the loading times. For some reason Spyro 1 takes like 20 to 30 seconds to load every single level on my SSD. And it's not like they're huge levels or anything, and Spyro 2 and 3 take about 2 seconds, so I have no idea what's going on with the first game. And I do have to also mention the final issue I have in terms of tech. The frame rate can cause some bugs here and there. For some reason it's harder to make some jumps when you're playing above 30 FPS. But worse, I've encountered a couple of progress blocks due to animations not playing correctly. To be clear, Spyro 1's Alpine Ridge level has an enemy that raises a wall and never drops it if I'm at 60 or above FPS. So if you have that problem, then the menu can solve it really easily, but it's a strange thing that never got patched. Anyway, the first game sets you up with a very basic story. The villain, Nasty Nork, gets a bit upset about being called out by a dragon peers and immediately turns them all to stone, but for some reason misses or ignores Spyro himself. So off you go, taking control of the titular Purple Dragon to bring sass, sarcasm and enthusiasm throughout your adventure through the worlds, save the dragons, recover the treasure and bring the Nork to justice. Controls are consistent and smooth for all 3 games, but we start off nice and simple here with a jump, gliding when you're in the air, charging for speed and as an attack, and you have flame breath as well. You can look around with the camera, but I find it a little bit slow, and you can centre it behind Spyro with just a simple button press. Personally, I use the flame breath for almost everything. Breaking pots, hitting enemies, whatever. Charge is useful for taking out metal objects that the flame breath can't, and that includes enemies wearing armour. It's very simple stuff, and rarely do you ever need to combine these mechanics in the first game. Some big enemies you can jump flame as a strategy, or bait out their attacks, but for the most part it's unnecessary. Luckily, it remains satisfying to burn and bonk everything there is, with appropriately fun sound and visual effects for both. You can even burn the scenery too, which is a nice detail. As you explore, your main objective is to free all the dragons in the worlds. You just have to touch the statues and it'll initiate a little dialogue from them. I'm quite sure every dragon is unique, apart from in the final world, where Spyro even makes a tongue-in-cheek joke about already having rescued one of them. But they mostly have a bunch of generic hints to tell you about the worlds and objectives, usually pretty obvious stuff. Some have funny little comments, quite a lot just say thanks. It's nothing too special, but I'm glad that they all do get a say. Your other main objective is to collect all the gems in each level. These come in various colours representing different values, not that it matters too much because you'll want all of them regardless. Many of these are scattered throughout the ground, and they tend to lead you from dragon to dragon. Levels are generally split into a few open areas with linear connections between them. But you can also find gems by beating each enemy, breaking pots, charging metal crates, finding the key to any locked ones, lighting fireworks and generally flaming or charging anything and everything that you see. Sometimes you'll find other ways to break sealed chests, like the supercharge or super flame power-ups too. And there's also the weird fans that you need to flame 3 times to trigger, which is a bit redundant, so they got removed in the later games. And the strange chests that pop a gem into the air that you have to jump to collect. It sounds quite basic, but the small variations on essentially just picking stuff up is actually welcome and appreciated. There's quite a lot of old school level design in this game, by which I mean you'll discover some incredibly sneaky hidden gems in a number of places, lots of them off the side of cliffs or around blind deadly jumps. Even in the first level you can glide to what feels like it should be out of bounds, but it's actually intended level design full of gems to grab. So make sure that you're diligent about searching for gems. Sparks, your dragonfly companion, can help you out here though. He can point to any unclaimed gem in a level until you've found them all. He'll also pick up any gems that you go near to, meaning you don't actually need to touch every single gem to get credit for them. which is nice. It makes the collectathon much smoother, though sometimes it's a little bit inconsistent and he can miss some, which made me constantly check behind me all the time to see if he's been slacking. Sparks is also your life indicator. Every hit that you take will change his colour from yellow to blue to green to not there at all, and your next hit is death. When he's not around, he won't be there to pick up nearby gems, or point you towards the ones that you're missing. Luckily, there's usually little animals around the levels that when killed will spawn a butterfly for him to eat and to heal with, or it'll just respawn the dragonfly himself if he's missing. I did tend to find that some levels had an abundance of healing and some didn't have much at all. Not really sure on the balance of that, it felt a little bit inconsistent. It got better in 2 and 3, with those kind of animals just being spread around the levels more evenly. Lives though were everywhere. I had tons of them saved up because they throw so many at you. This is probably because of that old school level design, because there's so many instant death pits to fall into, and Spyro can't swim, which is another death if you dare to touch water. I never game overed, but I must have lost like 30 lives in the first game just from missing so many random jumps. The treetops level with the chained supercharged jumping puzzle was a rough one. That must have got me killed a good amount on its own. Probably one of the more obscure solutions to 100%ing any of the levels. I was also absolutely awful at dealing with egg and key thieves. These are little dudes that taunt you with their na sounds and they sprint away from you at maximum speed. You gotta charge and chase them down, get barely just into flame range and pick your timing to hit them to rescue their stolen item. Some of them were really hard to catch, but they can be fun or frustrating to chase depending on your skill level and your tolerance. I was glad they kind of disappeared for a long time in the mid-game. They were just more things to collect, really. There's 6 hub worlds in the game, plenty of levels in each, a boss for each world, and a flying level in each one as well. Regular levels do seem to have a lot of open space sometimes, which could feel a bit empty occasionally, but they were pretty much all fun to play regardless. The bosses were all pretty similar. For the most part, they all felt like normal levels with a special enemy that you chase through them. Some had a more puzzle element to beating them, like timing dodges and flames to hit Shem's bottom, or bonking all of Metalhead's pylons. Toasty being a sheep on stilts was and still is funny to this day, and Nasty Nork himself was a lengthy chase level. Flying stages were a bit of a personal highlight. These give infinite flight and a time limit to gather a certain number of objectives. The whole point of these is to plan an effective route and to hit all of the objects accurately within the time limit to beat the level. As a fan of speedruns, these were satisfying to work out because in some cases you barely have enough time to do a good run, so it felt appropriately tuned in terms of difficulty. These flights were always a welcome part of each hub world for me, even if the field of view could make certain turns and tight spaces quite hard to judge. They do bring up the question of why can't Spyro just fly all the time, but look, the game would just be pretty dull if you could skip everything and fly around all the time, so let's just handwave that. Finally, I haven't mentioned the music yet, which is sort of appropriate. The tracks are actually really neat. They feel quite light and airy, generic fantasy sounding and upbeat. However, I can't recall a single track in my head. On my first playthrough I barely even noticed the music until I stopped to listen to it specifically. On this playthrough I did try to listen more, but it ended up blending into the background quite quickly, which is both a blessing and a curse. Nobody wants distracting audio, but it sadly doesn't have the same level of punch and memorability that the Crash Bandicoot soundtrack has for me, and this applied to all 3 games in the trilogy. For this video, Spyro 1 took me 4 hours and 30 minutes to beat at 120%, which is a pretty solid amount of playtime for an old game, and it was all good. Moving on to the second game, Ripto's Rage, and my what a difference in presentation. Spyro 2 has a ton of cutscenes and a ton of voiced characters. Has much more childish tone in a lot of places too, which felt a bit weird at times for me, but let's just indulge in the game and try to enjoy it. Despite saying that, I actually rather disliked our main few characters here. Hunter is insanely useless and unfunny. He even comes across as quite antagonistic in some cases by withholding things from you. The Professor is super weak and doesn't even try to do anything when he comes under duress. Elora comes across as a children's TV presenter, and Ripto, our big bad guy, isn't threatening at all. Even his minions, Crush and Gulp, these huge dinosaurs, are just kind of dumb, if you ask me. I didn't like the intro at all, but it's clearly for younger audiences, and the gameplay is what I enjoyed from the first game anyway. This game can be blasted through super quickly if you're not going for completion. There's only 3 hub worlds this time, but they have a lot more levels in them. What makes it so fast is that your main objective is no longer dragons that are spread throughout the levels, it's just kind of getting to the end of a level and occasionally killing some enemies along the way. You can pretty much charge through stuff really quickly for the most part, only stopping to collect a few gems here and there for a whole new purpose. But your main one now is talismans, which are rewarded for finishing the main level objective, and they're generally extremely easy. Collecting gems is now a key requirement for progress, not just optional stuff. because of a fan, favourite character? Moneybags, a greedy posh bear in a suit and a monocle. I say favourite, but people generally love to hate him. I found him quite fun of all the characters. He's probably my favourite for being such an insufferable git. Regardless, whenever you meet this guy, he'll ask for gems and deny access to something or other. At first, it's basic stuff like bridges or gates or whirlwinds, very minor progress blockers or optional areas, and small gem fees. Later though, he'll lock abilities and entire levels behind his asking prices, and these can get quite costly and rather common. For me, it was never a problem because I like to be thorough in collecting gems, so I almost always had enough to pay for the stuff he was selling, but I can see a less than 100% playthrough struggling a bit more for them. Sparks also makes getting gems a little easier in 2. I found his ability to pick them up was much smoother in the sequel, which I appreciated, but he does still sometimes leave 1 or 2 behind, so I did still end up checking behind me all the time. Spyro has some new abilities as well, not just our dragonfly friend. During a glide you can now cancel it to hover for a second, which gives a little extra height and a bit extra distance too, handy for longer jumps or for extra precision. You can now also swim, which is welcome for adding to the depth of level design, and not losing lives to every single body of water. Moneybags will also sell you the ability to dive underwater early on, opening up lots of exploration. You can also buy the ability to climb ladders as well, which honestly wasn't used all that much. And you'll eventually get hold of a head bash ability, which is pretty much a butt stomp if you're talking Mario, or a ground pound move for a few very niche specific chests or enemies. All these things mean that level design offers some opportunity to return later with these new abilities. Even in the first level you'll find a climbable ladder that you can't access on first visit. Levels generally feel like there's an intended path to traverse them that feels smooth and optimal. There's a lot less old level design at work, with much fewer awkwardly hidden objects to find and a lot more obvious pathways to take. However, some levels suffer from backtracking quite heavily, especially if you don't know where to go, don't have enough gems, or the right upgrades. Sometimes you'll have to redo a whole level, because upon getting to the end, you'll open up a new objective that you can't actually complete on first visit, and the level resets when you exit and come back later. You'll also encounter question mark pots that change location if you hit them, usually backtracking all the way through a level multiple times to eventually drop those gems. Not a fan of these things. They also make a return in Spyro 3, but thankfully only briefly. And for some reason the flame gem jump boxes are gone completely. Heck, egg thieves are only present in a couple of levels too, now that I think about it. For what it's worth, enemies no longer drop gems in this game, but they do count for unlocking a power-up in each level that you will probably need anyway, so it's not really much of a change. You kill enough of them to open up a super flame, flight, supercharge, super jump, invincibility, or an ice breath in one level. Each of these is usually used for some kind of specific level goal, which usually rewards some gems or an orb, which is another main thing to collect instead of dragons or eggs. So, talismans for finishing a level, gems scattered throughout, and now orbs. These are rewarded for doing various side objectives. These can range from minigames to hidden areas to puzzles or being a mini-boss. Mostly they're an interesting addition that fleshes each level out a lot and adds some fun playtime. There's 64 of them in total to find, but some really do drag on. Drag on. No, I'll see myself out. There's a number of minigames that do hurt the pace of the game, some that require you to perform an action more times than necessary if you ask me. Scoring 5 ice hockey goals and then doing it again. Collecting 10 crystals and then doing 15 immediately afterwards. Stuff like that. Worse are any that involve escorting or herding NPCs. The alchemist is an absolute moron, and charging the rock elementals over and over again while he decides to run near them was just pure pain. And then, Hunter says come back later because you don't have the head bash yet, so you have to backtrack later on and do the escort again. Pain! Herding the weird elephant-trunked sheep things and turtles as well are just why moments for the game. Just real low points, but thankfully there's not many of those. They really do slow the pacing of the game down, and it is a real shame. I also wasn't a huge fan of shooting rocks and cannons, or the trading puzzle level either. Just shooting mechanics aren't really that good in these games. And trouble with a trolley, eh?
Trouble with the trolley, eh? Well,
yeah, might have just given some people some traumatic flashbacks there. Sorry, not sorry. For the most part, orbs are fun enough though. Something else to do, reason to play the game, and get more out of the levels. Flight levels also make a return here, and they're still fun to do, though much easier this time. They also have a hidden orb in the levels as well to find once you're done with the main bit. These were generally why I didn't like Hunter very much, among the various cutscenes where he kind of just fumbles around uselessly. Speaking of, each level has its own intro and exit cutscene. These were great. I loved most of them for adding so much character to the world. There's so many funny little things going on in all of them. And some of them go really dark as well, like hilariously cartoon violence levels. The Magma Core has a guy accidentally murder his friend and then casually hide the evidence and carry on partying like nothing happened, weirdly. The Robot Metro level has a guy get bored of waiting for his bus, attempt to cross the road and get instantly smashed by a car. Hilarious though, these things were great. I love this edition. With there only being 3 hub worlds, there's also only 3 main bosses. These were much more involved than Spyro 1's bosses, but they were only fights and not whole levels. I actually struggled on these a fair bit because they lead their shots really well and it's not always clear where you should run to be safe. The second boss in particular, Gulp, leads his shots surprisingly well, and they land with a lingering hitbox, so you have to really react well to that. He can also heal by stealing your chickens, but at least you can shoot a rocket at Ripto for fun if you feel like wasting ammunition. Reignited Trilogy also adds additional challenges in all 3 of these games, which are additional objectives and secrets to find that unlock the art gallery for you. These were nice to do once, but I didn't bother this time through. Concept art is always pretty interesting to see, but some of the stuff you had to do was obscure or quite tough in some cases, particularly beating all the bosses without taking a single hit. Gulp and Ripto were easy to make mistakes on. The third and final hub world is entirely skippable if you've collected and backtracked to all the previous levels and done 100% up until that point. I accidentally fought Ripto in this playthrough by walking too far past the gems at his door. Not really sure how I feel about that, but I went through the levels for completion anyway, of course I did. I don't think any of these were my favourites though. It was a rather small hub too, compared to World 2, which was massive. The ultimate endgame reward for full completion was questionable at best. Once you have everything, there's no need to go back into those levels, there's nothing to collect. But they unlock a permanent super flame for you to do nothing with. I mean, you could go and refight all the bosses with it, but I don't know why you would. It also unlocks on all 3 save files, so if you did want to replay the whole game, you can actually start a new file with it already unlocked and use it for a whole playthrough. So I guess there's that, but it felt a bit like cheating to me, so I toggled it off for this video. Which, by the way, isn't explained in the game at all. I had to look this up. I'll leave the PC code in the description of this video, since that's the platform I played it on. Spyro 2 was overall much easier than the first game, but I owe that mostly to having a lot fewer random deaths from falling into pits. I think I died like 5 times total for what it's worth, compared to the 30 plus that I died in the first game. For this video, Spyro 2 took me 5 hours and 30 minutes to beat at 100%, which surprises me because it felt quite a bit faster than the first game, but apparently not. Finally, finishing things up with Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon, which feels a little like taking the best of the previous 2 games and mixing those things together. I know we've not really gone far or evolved very much in these 3. Spyro still controls the same throughout the trilogy and the same sort of gameplay applies to everything, but little things come together in 3 that add up to probably the best of the bunch. For example, right off the bat we have the dragons showing back up to the story. They don't stick around because it's their eggs that the bad guys are after this time, so they get stolen by a new enemy faction called the Rhinox and Bianca, who we'll talk to a bunch throughout the game. The dragons can't fit through the holes that the eggs have been taken through though, so Spyro and Hunter, they go after them instead. Yes, Hunter returns again, but he's nowhere near as bumbling or annoying this time around, which is nice. He does still hold back some important items from you for some reason, and his minigames and objectives are usually some of the worst in the game, involving a lot of shooting objectives, but at least he's slightly more likeable now. Another thing that returns are all of your abilities from Ripto's Rage. You can still swim, dive, climb, hover and head bash from the get-go, so being familiar with those is helpful, but you'll encounter short reminders as you go anyway. You really don't get any totally new abilities in this game, which you could see as a negative thing, but you instead get more involved side objectives that put more focus on temporary abilities. Honestly, focusing more on the level design, your main attacks and basic movement was probably the best decision that Insomniac could have made, because that's what made Spyro 1 so good to begin with. 2's level design felt a bit too short and full of distractions for the orbs, but 3 really nails the feeling of charging through a section of a level, hoovering up all the gems, beating all the baddies, hitting a quick side objective and then moving swiftly onwards to the next section. Speaking of which, enemies are back to dropping gems again, making them all required to be if you want the 112%. They'll start testing your quick thinking much more often than they have previously, asking you to combine your jumps, glides, flames, charges and dodges to get around their attacks and defences. Some of them even have armour that you need to charge off first before you can flame them for a second hit. There's also some particularly quick firing projectile enemies in some cases that actually got me using the dodge move that I haven't even talked about at this point. It's still nothing challenging overall, but it's nice that they started combining your abilities more effectively. Our main objective now is to save the dragon eggs, which feels a lot like the dragons in the original. They're all named, all 150 of them, and all have a little animation when you do. They start repeating very quickly, but I appreciated that the detail is there and that you can still skip it. You get these for doing all sorts of things. Getting to the level end always rewards one, there's usually hidden ones out and about, sometimes a mini-boss might have one, often there's side objectives and areas to explore for them too. Basically it's a combination of dragon statues, talismans and orb quests from the previous 2 games. And since we're saving eggs, of course the thieves make a proper return. I actually liked them this time. They felt a lot more catchable, like the window to strike them felt a lot more fair than they did in the first game, and there were a few purpose-built areas to chase them down in too. The supercharged side areas were pretty fun to give them a proper bonk with. There's 4 hub worlds this time, each with 8 levels to explore. Each hub has 1 main boss, 1 flight level with multiple objectives, a character-based level, a Sparks solo level, and 4 regular levels. It's a shame that the level intro and exit cutscenes have been removed, but you do get a few hub cutscenes as you progress. The flight levels are pretty tightly tuned again this time, with the objective of hitting all the targets being as easy as previous, but we also have a race in each. These have you using speed boosts and homing rockets to slow the opposition and blast past them as quickly as possible. You follow a trail around the sky and fly through the rings, which is easy enough, right? Well, not so much, because if you miss one then you have to reset, and sometimes even missing a speed boost can doom you to the same thing because the opponents are deceptively hard to beat. I still enjoyed them though, it's a good variation from the standard levels. Other playable characters also offer a variety of gameplay styles. Moneybags makes a triumphant return, and this time he's asking absolutely extortionate prices for everything possible. I still think he's kind of brilliant, he's fun to hate, you know, but he's way more aggressively priced this time around, and he's now locking characters away, which when freed will give you a cathartic cutscene of kicking Moneybags' arse and letting you take control of them in their specific areas. First up we got Sheila the Kangaroo. Her whole thing is verticality. She can double jump, her basic jump can bounce into a huge launch if you jump again after landing, and she can headbash like Spyro can. She can also kick enemies as a basic attack as well, which is satisfying to dish out a solid whack with. Unfortunately, Sheila's a bit slow and loses some horizontal momentum when you kick and while you're in the air, which is often because she's a kangaroo, and I felt that way most of the time I played with her. She has a couple of notable sub-areas, one where you play as a side-scroller, which was kind of fun to do for a bit, and one where you headbash some mushrooms and escort a bomb-wielding NPC, which was rather infuriating. You have to do it twice as well, and both guys move without any sort of logic, so I failed on every single possible mushroom until I learned their nonsensical patterns. Those guys have an absolute death wish. They are awful. But she's not the only playable character, and not the only one that I found a bit slow or clunky either, which is a bit of a shame. Sergeant Bird is next, and he brings full free flight to the table. Also, rocket launchers. The little penguin waddles around really slowly, and flies almost equally slowly, but at least he can just blow everything up. Thing is though, the Spyro games are platformers, and I feel like free helicopter-like flight pretty much just ignores all the level design, and the problem-solving aspect of that diminishes. There's actually a level designed to be explored as him, with some rather annoying flying enemies that are just out of Spyro's normal reach, but you don't know that until you're able to bring Bird out at the end of the level, when you've already frustrated yourself against these guys. Actually, the level in question, Enchanted Towers, is probably the least likeable level in the game. It wasn't so bad on repeat play, knowing that I could bring out the big guns, but it's got all the worst parts all in one level. An escort side objective, first-person shooting rock mechanics against moving and retaliating targets, it's slow-paced because of needing to retrieve ammo for Spyro, an open-ended scavenger hunt for hidden enemies, it has a skateboarding minigame, and a particularly cringy dancing NPC. The less said about that, the better. The third character you can unlock would be Bentley the Yeti, who pretty much just smashes things with his club. He can push some stuff, which you use maybe 4 times ever, reflect projectiles, which again I think I've maybe used 4 times total. He can barely jump, and can smash mail crates. He's a funny, well-spoken gentleman, but another slow-paced character in a world where Spyro moves so smoothly and quickly, and it just hurts the pace of it. And finally we have Agent 9. Some people might find this chaotic monkey to be funny. I just found him too energetic for my old man bones. He plays like a weird third or sometimes first person shooter shoo-in, again in a world where we're used to platforming and charging around at top speed. Aiming with an analog stick is not the best gameplay, and mouse acceleration is sometimes on and sometimes off, making using that control sometimes even worse. There wasn't a lot of Agent 9 content, thankfully, because it just felt out of place for me, though I did enjoy the first person bit in the firework factory this time through. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame that all the alternate characters are a bit off or slow in some way, but the variety is still appreciated nonetheless. You also get to play as Sparks in a top-down old-school shooters type scenario. There's 4 of these levels, and while not very notable either, the rewards for beating them are handy to have. You get an increased gem pickup range and an extra health hit for Spyro if you beat the 4th one, which is nice. All these characters have a few sub-areas for dragon eggs in the game, but a fairly common type would be the skateboarding sub-levels. Clearly the original Spyro devs were Tony Hawk fans, but this just ain't it, chief. You kinda just jump off ramps and try to hit sick gnarly tricks, dude, of which you can spin horizontally, vertically, or both at once, and that's kind of it. You are asked at one point to do a 900, which is very much on the nose. So you're either going for points, or collecting all the objects in a level, or hitting all the enemies, or doing a race in these sub-areas where tricks give you boost to go faster. I'm not really a big fan of these areas. A lot of the jumps feel too on edge, like they're not quite tuned right. Like I'm going too fast or too slow to make them, and it's quite easy to miss a trick or get stuck in the scenery sometimes. I would leave the PS1 skateboarding stuff to the Neversoft team, I think. The main bosses were pretty decent though, better than Spyro 2's, but still a bit gimmicky and involving power-ups. At least this time they felt much fairer, without leading their shots or attacks without warning. One of the sub-area bosses must have taken me 20 plus minutes though, the Fireworks Factory Dragons. These fly around in semi-random patterns and regenerate health, while they get smaller and smaller as you flame them. They shoot back too, so you can't just take all your time and be careful, or you'll never hit them enough to finish them off, as you fly around the arena in circles and circles and circles, dodging meteors and getting ever so frustrated that your super flame isn't quite hitting the decreasing body mass of these snaky sods. If they didn't regen it would be fine, but they do, so it wasn't. However, despite some complaints and the odd choice here and there, I think Spyro 3 had the strongest level design, pacing, feel and control application of the trilogy. The other characters are largely optional, the few frustrating moments I had are also avoidable, and everything else was exactly what I wanted. A well-tailored set of levels with a fun set of themes, and goal of smoothly progressing and having fun overall. Coming from a set of developers at Insomniac originally, and now Toys for Bob, that understood as much through the experience of making those original games. I also very much appreciated being able to kick money bags in his bulging gem sacks a whole lot, to get some revenge at the end of the game. Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon took me 7 hours and 30 minutes, roughly, to get 112% completion, which is almost double the first game. Impressive stuff, just about staying within its welcome. And that is the Spyro Reignited Trilogy. I'd recommend it, even without the nostalgia factor. I rather did enjoy running through all the levels and doing it again for this video. If you do already have the nostalgia for the originals though, this is a pretty easy recommend, because it's only going to feel that much more fresh and updated from the PS1 days, though I'd probably still say get it on sale. I'm not sure I'd pay full price for it nowadays. I hope you've enjoyed watching. I've been MagicalMike, and I'm Quids in with this game. Cheers.